Well, Sony sneakily brought out a revised PS5. Didn't really announce anything, it just released. And we've had a few people look into it, namely Austin, who's made a big stir on Twitter and social media and all over the place, to be honest. And yeah, the PS fan base are pissed.
Now fly! Fly!
Personally, I'd be more pissed off that PS5 or Sony decided to sneak out a console like this, not even a year after the launch of the original console, which makes you wonder why, if Sony was such a genius, such a god, as they completely go on about, you have to wonder why they did that with less than a year after the original console. If it was so purposely made, it was so perfect, made to perfection, why in less than a year have they revised it? Why has it already been revised? Apparently it's just to lose weight, but there is more to it than that. They've not just done it to remove weight, they've actually made quite a few changes to it, as Austin showed. Because this is in a week, remember, that we've had Ratchet & Clank, their fan base be told that Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart can also be done on the PS3. Not the entire game, not all the graphics, not that. They're on about just the portal jumping, which they said is next gen, and you need a PS5 for. You need the PS5 SSD to allow that to happen. That was a lie, myth, which I've said ages ago. There's been loads of games of it. We've had PS5 fanboys deflecting that, saying it wasn't possible. You need a PS5, even though Psychonauts 2 does it. Titanfall does it. Halo Chief Master Collection, that does it. I don't know if you've ever played the game, but you can switch at a touch of a button between the old gen version and the new gen version. You can switch between the two. Exactly the same principle. But they was under the illusion, because Sony told them, that it can only happen on the PS5 SSD. So several developers have come out and said that's not entirely true. It can happen as far back as the PS3. We also had the medium drop on the PS5 recently, and it's running much slower than the load time is running much slower than the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S. So now you can understand there's just so many nails being hit into this coffin that the cult army went out in force to damage control what Austin said. Yes, they was all over Twitter, damage controlling him, saying he's not an engineer, claiming you need to be an engineer now to take apart the PS5 and to do such checks like use a screwdriver and a thermometer, even though only a couple of weeks ago they was claiming it's easy to open up the PS5 and put the new SSD in it, the external SSD into it. You don't need to be an engineer. It's for go forward a couple of weeks, and now you do need to be an engineer to do this, and apparently Austin isn't qualified. This guy seems to believe Sony engineers are so qualified and they're over 80 years old, which is weird. It's just hard to get my head around. Their entire engineering team are all over 80. It must be like just a whole bunch of, I don't know, Jedis or something. Weird. But let's not waffle anymore. Let's go into what Austin actually said. So we cover his points, which are basically power, weight, temperature of the console, the sound, and it does at the end go into how it's overclocked. So let me start with power.
Control 228, 230. Oh wow. So the thing with the
actually the thing is, before we continue, I'd like to highlight here that he's actually doing this to the new revised PS5, which is a digital version, not the disc version. I think people are missing that point here, because people are now comparing it to Xbox Series X. Xbox Series X is a disc version. The version he's got here is a discless version. So just bear that in mind here. We're comparing a digital console to a disc console. Right, so before I get out of the way. So let's go into this. So the new PS5 runs at 230 watts. Just like to clarify here, the Xbox Series X, which is a disc version, runs at 220 watts. So it uses less power. It doesn't need as much power to run.
3542.
Wow.
300 grams lighter.
Riveting content.
So next up, we're covering weight. Never sure why this is an issue, really, to be honest with you. But it is, or for someone. I really don't know why they did this to alter the weight. Obviously, I did not do this to alter just the weight. There's more behind it than that. But let's look at the weight of the PS5 Digital, the new PS5 Digital. That's 3541 grams or 7.8 pounds. Now, the Xbox Series X disc version comes in at 4.445. So you can see it's heavier. Or, in other terms, 9.8 pounds. So it's basically 7.8 pounds of the PS5 new version versus 9.8 pounds of the Xbox Series X. So the Xbox Series X is understandably heavier.
42.1. Very small difference.
Next up, we have sound. Sound is quite important. I hate the sound of a buzzing machine in the background, or especially when recording, when you got the or the just horrible noise you get at the background when you're doing anything. It's just a horrible, just especially when you're trying to sleep and you've got it running, you can just hear it and it just plays in your mind. That's probably just me. Okay, so the weight of the new PS5 is the sound of the new PS5 is 42.1 dB, which is slightly quieter than the original, but it's still 42.1 dB. In comparison, the Xbox Series X with a disc is 22 dB, so it's half the quietness again. To give you a comparison, when a leaf rustles, it's 20 dB, so it's barely louder than a leaf rustling. The Xbox Series X. A normal whisper is measured at 30 dB, so the Xbox is actually quieter than a whisper, while the new PS5 is considerably louder. So there we go.
51, 52 degrees, okay? So now let's take a look at the new one and see where we're at here. 55, 56. So this one's actually somewhat warmer. A 3 or 4 degree difference isn't huge, but that actually is something, especially you consider that the fans sound different.
So the new revised PS5 is running at 55 degrees Celsius. Right, so in comparison to Xbox Series X, I've got several stats here. Running at a minimum, it runs at a minimum of 38.9. Average is 47.7. Maximum, that's when it's playing, stressing out a game, is 50.4. So the Xbox Series X, even when stressed, it's still not running as hot as the new revised PS5. So that's interesting to see there, isn't it? In fact, the maximum heat on the Xbox Series X compared to a PC with an RTX 380, the RTX 380 runs at 44.1. So there we go. PlayStation 4 Pro run at 65. Wow. The Xbox One X even didn't let off as much heat as the PS5. So there we go. So the Xbox Series X with its disk drive and all doesn't run as hot as the new PS5. So there we have it, as just sort of a minor breakdown there. So in comparison to the older PS5, as he says, it's not as good as the original PS5 in some ways, and it's not even as good as the Xbox Series X. So I'm just wondering what the revised version is actually for. And they did take it apart and look at it. It's got a small heatsink, loads of changes, things up to the fan, which is probably why it's noisier and stuff, and letting off more heat because the fans, I don't know, not so good. Clearly the reason they've done this is to budget. They've clearly slid out a budget PS5 to make more money on sales, which I think is fairly underhanded and naughty. They should probably lower the price. Maybe they might do that. Maybe they might announce that in their show coming up. I would strongly advise them to do that, because if you're going to sell something that's a budget item, you should really offer a budget price. You shouldn't be offering games the same amount of price for a lower quality console. And I say lower quality console because I just wanted to get onto the last thing Austin mentions here briefly.
The thing with the PS5 that you need to consider is that unlike the Xbox, there is a variable boost frequency, right? So the PS5 will run the CPU and GPU as high as they can, but there's some variability there.
There we go there. What he was aiming at there is the variable frequency, and the fact that it can get hotter when it's chunking in temps is overclocking. He's mentioned overclocking, which seems to be sort of not really, it seems to be sort of pushed aside and people don't like to talk about it. There's a good reason why people don't like to talk about overclocking or mention overclocking, especially Sony. So overclocking is a method of obtaining more performance out of your CPU than what the manufacturer intended. By sending more volts to the CPU, it expands its performance capabilities. Now, to go into the pros of overclocking, there's actually only one pro for overclocking performance. It's why gamers and PC enthusiasts overclock a CPU and a GPU graphics processor unit. When you send more voltage to either the CPU or GPU, the graphics increase, response times of applications are reduced, and benchmarks can identify peak performance for complex software. This is what the PlayStation 5 does. So now we go into the cons, because there is really only one pro. Now we go into the cons of overclocking. The biggest issue with overclocking is the reduction in its components' lifespan. You can overclock a CPU, a GPU, a board or RAM, but sending increased volts gradually damages components. Damage is caused by heat generated from increased power. Additional heat doesn't usually ruin the circuit immediately, so the damage is seen gradually over time, but it is there. So to continue, as you know, your CPU has a fan and heatsink attached to it to pull heat away from the processor and disperse it into the air. These components work well together to keep the CPU's core temperature down. When you overclock, the fan and the heatsink aren't usually adequate for the heat removal. For this reason, gamers and enthusiasts who overclock take extra precautions when increasing voltage input. Water cooling is an expensive alternative to a heatsink and fan, but is an efficient way to cool an overclocked CPU. And if you recall, the PS5 has liquid cooling in it. Water cooling is a special type of system that uses pipes and cooled water and run over the CPU. Heat disperses into the cooled water and the pumps pull the heated away. But I'm digressing here because I don't use water cooling. It uses liquid cooling. But it's more or less the same thingy, and this is kind of what it is happening with the PS5. You can't get around it, that the PS5 is overclocked. This is why originally when it came out, it was stated that the PS5 was actually 9 teraflops. But then the overclocked version is 10 teraflops. It's been pushed to 10 teraflops. This is where the dip comes in. This is why the performance, it could drop down to... But all that was rubbish. If you're trying to find... I've tried to find where they originally stated it. I think a lot of people remember they did state 9 teraflops. And trying to go back on that and find the information on it is very hard now. Because sorry, I'm losing my voice here. Because everything we've heard about now is just 10 teraflops, 10 teraflops, 10 teraflops. That's been sort of drilled into people's brains. So, and the worrying thing is, so as we know now, it's hotter, which highlights the overclocking, but the fans change, obviously, to remove the heat. But the worrying thing is that they've shrunk the heatsink in the new PS5. Another disadvantage is the heat-related bugs that can occur. When a CPU overheats, it usually results in PC crashes, and eventually the component is irreparable. It's damaged and must be replaced. CPUs are expensive, and it's harder to find CPUs that work with older motherboards. And I'm just wondering if this is what they've done. They've sort of replaced bits because the old ones were burning out, and they was worried there's going to be a backlash on it, so they replaced it to try to compensate for the overclocking. I do wonder as well, in the future, will we have another revised PS5? Will that be their way going forward to avoid paying out at the end of the day? Because if you have a machine from day one, 5 years later, overclocked, it's probably going to burn out. So maybe they're going to keep every year injecting new PS5s. So the damage, when it does happen, when people do say my machine's broken down, the damage will be less, if you know what I mean, compared to the market. How many people from launched to 5 years' time would own the same PS5 compared to only them owning the ones that have only been out a year or so? Hope you can grasp where I'm going with this. Overall, overclocking has advantages if you really need some extra speed and power, but it is damaging to your console. So before the end of the video, I just want to touch on one final thing. It's just about a video that Austin's just released recently, and it's just covering some points about the video he make. Basically, he's been now trolled by, I would put as the world's most toxic gaming fan base ever to exist, the PS community, who have sent him death threats. Let me just show you just a clip of what he said in his recent video.
Video first went live. There were a few people who were like, oh, I don't know, blah, 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 whatever. But over the last few days, I mean, my Twitter has been absolutely unusable. People like, fuck you, Microsoft paid you, or like, oh, the amount of videos people have made. And look, I'm not gonna hate on you for jumping on a trend and making this stuff, but the amount of like, Austin Evans is a liar, the PS5 is no, or oh, I think that the thermal material they took out of there, that's completely useless and all this kind of stuff.
So yeah, they completely trolled him. They sent him. He got death threats in his messages. They were just hateful, sending him hate messages. There's even people doxing him. I'm not sure if you know what doxing is. I will slap it up on the screen now for you to understand. Yes, it's disgusting and diabolical, and something needs to be done about this fan base that seems to go unchecked, thinking they, on one hand, think they're protecting developers and protecting people, and they're the world's best gaming community because they're absolutely deluded and brainwashed, while attacking everyone. And I mean, they attack and hate on everyone. Why hate on a guy that's got the new console that you bloody adore and pray to like it's some sort of god? We actually call the developer of it a god. He's got the machine before you, took it apart to show you it's not worth buying because it's hard for another one. It's just not worth buying. He's actually doing you a favour, you fucking morons. He's not like attacking you. He's just telling you what's up with the new console, what you're actually going to be paying for when you get this new product. But you're such corporate slaves and so indoctrinated to Sony and can't have anything bad said against Sony. Even if they release something that is bad for you, you can't have it. You have to defend them because you are sheer corporate slaves. You go on the attack straight away. You've got no substance to your points or arguments. You've got nothing. You're calling him liars. What's your lie? You're calling him a liar based on what? You're calling him lying based on what? Have you got the new console and taken it apart and had a look? Have you done that yourselves? Have you done anything he's done? He cannot be a liar because he literally showed you on screen. I've shown you. He takes the measurements himself. What is he lying about? He is not lying about a single thing. And you've got idiots like Saltiest Gaming and people like that are just attacking him because he's hurt your brand. He's hurt your cult. You feel offended, personally, emotionally attached to your console so hard that you feel like he's insulted your child, like he's kicked your kid across the floor. That's how hurt you are inside. So now you have to come out and attack him back. You feel just hurt deep, deep inside. You're a bunch of fucking idiots. You are a bunch of fucking morons. You're a bunch of kids and you need to grow up. Seriously, you need to grow up. You're a bunch of idiots. Fucking go out and get some lives. Have some kids. Get a job. Do something. Stop with this nonsense. It's pathetic. It's just disgusting and pathetic. Just stop. Just because someone has a different opinion from you. Not an opinion, because someone posts some facts that you don't like. It's not that you don't agree with them, because they're facts. It's just that you don't like the truth. So you attack. You go on the attack and lie for your corporation that gives no shits about you. They give no fucking shits. They've just raised the price of your games again. They give no shits about you. Fucking grow up. You need to grow up. Anyway, I think I'll leave the video there. Thank you all for watching once again. Thank you all for subscribing. Please throw this out. Please share it out. Trying to hit 1,000 before Christmas. Not very likely, but thank you all for watching anyway. And goodbye for now.